let's get into some football to finish up here. Let's touch on this all-white squad. We got an all-white squad to play Malaysia and Tahiti at North Harbour Stadium early in October. The all-white squad: Crocombe, Paulson, Sale. Shout out Ollie Sale. We got Bindon, Boxall, Cacace, Payne, Pinecker, Rue, Tommy Smith, Sutton, Garbett, Howison, Rufa, Staminich, Barbarousis, Just, Old, Rogerson, Wayne, Wood. What's just kind of a broad theme you see in this all-white squad compared to the squad who had a good draw, I'd say, against the USA and a tough loss against Mexico?
Yeah, but the other way around, so that the good draw came after the tough loss, which is the opposite of Black Caps grid, is they actually they improved from the first game to the second game. They didn't get way worse, so that's nice. There is a little bit of there might be a little bit of Gary Stead about Darren Baisley, I think, sometimes, and it's maybe like Ollie Sale's selection could be considered part of that. But I also think there's a few instances in this squad where there is a younger guy, specifically. I think the goalkeeping stocks are there. I think there's a couple of attackers, maybe. Come on, yeah. So there's some cases you can make for guys who are either emerging into the squad or from just guys who haven't been picked for a little while in good form. Andre De Jong, case in point, who aren't here because it's quite a consistent side, but then also like, I don't know, like I quite like that he's established a top tier of how he wants to, like, where he sees the selections, what his depth chart is or whatever. And even for games against Malaysia and Tahiti, I think, did you say Malaysia, the game is in Auckland Day, and then the Tahiti game, for some reason, they're playing it in Vanuatu, I think. That's the Tahiti one is a World Cup qualifier, part of a little group stage thing. And the Malaysia game is just because there's 4 teams in a group, so there's 3 World Cup qualifiers over the next 2 windows, which meant you can fit 2 games in a thing. So let's bring over a team and have a friendly game, which is cool. It's at home. It's against a team we should beat, or at least very, very much capable of beating. Should really win all 4 of their games over this window and the next window. So that's all good stuff. And I did look at the squad and thought, like, that is not full strength. I wasn't expecting it to be full strength. I thought there'd be a few guys who would be rested, but actually working through it and seeing like the recent squads and who, like, cross-referencing who's not there, who has been there recently. Because I can have a couple gripes about like so and so's form deserves to be recalled or whatever, but it's just, then you have to drop someone. But looking at the I don't know, the pick and order that Baisley's established and who he hasn't picked here. Wilkins was in the last squad. Grieve hasn't been in there for a little bit. McCoward isn't there. Singh isn't there. Those guys. Matt Diaz was in one squad a little while ago and hasn't been available again since. But all those guys are injured. So those aren't droppings or not being reselected. It's they've been injured. Grieve went off in the first half of his most recent game and probably doesn't have the form to demand a recall anyway. Wilkins hasn't played since getting injured and having to withdraw from the last all-white squad. McCoward did make it back to the bench recently for Silkeborg, but obviously that's after the squad was probably already picked. Like, it's too late, not ready. Singh has yet to debut for his club in Portugal after also withdrawing from the last all-white squad. Other players who aren't there, like Max Mata hasn't been picked, but that's just because Ben Waine is in that spot ahead. And how many number 9s you're going to pick when your captain is Chris Wood? Like, you pick someone who might actually get some minutes, which is a more versatile, wider forward in that situation, which they've done with Logan Rogerson. Bill Tuiloma's not there. Bill Tuiloma shouldn't be there because he was there last time. He came off the bench in both games, but he was there as like a late call up because of Wilkins' injury. Tuiloma hasn't played anything other than reserve football for his club team for quite a while, so that's not form that gets you back in there. The only 2 I'd say who are not there, who I think could have been there, are Finn Sermon and Joe Bell. And the difference between them and some of these other guys like Staminich, Garbett, Wood, or like the Cacace, these fellas being available and turning up and playing. Difference between Sermon and Bell and them is that they're at the start of their seasons. These guys are at the end of their seasons. The MLS only has about 3 or 4 weeks left until playoffs. And Finn Sermon hasn't played yet, but his coach is on record as saying he wants to get him some minutes before the end. So just sticking around, training, being available there. He wouldn't necessarily be a starter for the All Whites anyway, so it just makes sense for him to stick with his club and keep embedding there. And Joe Bell, it's his, again, like this Norwegian season, 5 or 6 games left, I think. And his Viking club are trying to qualify for Europe. They're trying to get into the top four, possibly even second in Norway. And he could play. He would be eligible. It would mean flying all the way back to halfway around the world and then back again at the where like because other guys in the squad are doing similar things, but they're in a situation where they're early in the season. They could probably afford to miss the next game if they're feeling a little sore after the travel. Joe Bell's not. Like he missed a game with suspension 2 weeks ago and his team got thrashed. He came back and they won 4-1 on the weekend. So he's an extremely influential player for Viking. He plays 90 minutes basically every game, and he just can't afford to get injured at this stage of the season. And we have other good midfielders, and these are not priority games. They're priority outcomes. We need to get a nice little win against Malaysia just for form and confidence. Need to win the World Cup qualifiers because we're trying to qualify for a World Cup. But we can do that with A-League players filling in some of these spots. So that's kind of the gist of the squad. Is that it's quite close to full strength, but there are 1 or 2 little aspects where just being fair on players in their club situation, but not as many as I thought. I thought maybe Marko Stamanic wouldn't play, or maybe Chris Wood. Well, it's hard to keep Chris Wood out of All Whites games, especially these kind of ones where he will be eyeing up goals. We want to come in and add to his already record All Whites tally, but. Ben Old maybe was this guy I was a little bit surprised to see. Maybe he'd stick in France and hang around. But all these guys are basically coming back for these games. So there's always a great environment around these All Whites camps. Like the guys love playing, representing their country. It's just a matter of getting some results. But these are the kind of games where they should be able to get nice, comfortable victories. And because they've picked a strong squad, well, we'll get to see a strong squad. We'll get to see hopefully Chris Wood getting some goals at North Harbour Stadium or wherever it is.
I did have a realization watching Chris Wood play for Nottingham Forest this weekend. Did they lose that game?
Yeah, they lost 1-0 to Fulham. It was Fulham scored an early second half penalty.
And Chris
did
Wood
you watch the whole game? Because I only watched the highlights. Did Woodsy do anything good?
He got a couple of offsides. Good stuff there, as is usually the case for the Woodsman. But the realization I had, and this kind of frames, I had to peep this awareness because it kind of puts into perspective what we do. But I was like, I'm watching Chris Wood the same way I watch Steven Adams play basketball, where no matter where the ball is, I'm watching Chris Wood and Steven Adams. So I understand when other people don't know what Steven Adams or Chris Wood are doing. Because when they watch football or basketball, they're watching the ball. But when I watch Chris Wood, I'm watching Chris Wood. Like, I'm not there for anything else with Nottingham Forest. Couldn't give 2 damns about what Fulham are doing. I'm watching Chris Wood. I'm watching Chris Wood work backwards. I'm watching Chris Wood create space. I'm watching Chris Wood go offside. I'm watching everything to do with Chris Wood. In the same way when I'm watching NBA and Steven Adams is playing, I'm only watching Steven Adams. So I'm seeing everything Steven Adams does. And that was just a realization for me, because I'm like, okay, I can't really expect anyone else to know how awesome Steven Adams or Chris Wood is, because they don't care about him the same way I care about him, the same way I watch him. So it was just something that I had to take on board. And like, I still find it funny because in that team, who's the guy who I said was a really good passer for Nottingham Forest? Didn't play against Fulham.
Morgan Gibbs-White.
Yeah. So there's players like that. There's other players in the Nottingham Forest team who, like, you're like, okay, Nottingham Forest win a penalty. Who's going to take the penalty? Surely it's one of the, step over gods. Surely it's one of the attacking players who's just silky. And I can imagine the joy on the opposition team fans and the just like, for a Nottingham Forest fan who doesn't know anything about Chris Wood, when Chris Wood steps up to take the penalty. Because if I'm not a Kiwi and I'm a Fulham fan in that game and I'm watching Chris Wood step up for the penalty and I've seen the razzle dazzle from all the other players, I'm like, praise Jah that Chris Wood's taken this penalty, because he's just kind of like a big Kiwi boy who plays striker, who could also play centre defender. Why is he taking the penalty? But in my mind, I know as a Kiwi Chris Wood fan, Chris Wood's going to score the penalty. And it's a very specific Kiwi sports thing that I don't think anyone else would care about. But I care about it. So shout out to Chris Wood. Are there any other flying Kiwis?
Steven Adams's free throws were as good as Chris Wood's penalties, I think rebounding wise, they've got a lot in common there. I think Chris Wood is a great rebounder in his own footballing way, winning aerials, getting up and getting the ball. Same way that Steven Adams goes up and gets the ball, brings it down, gets it under control, flips it off to a teammate. The free throw penalty thing doesn't quite translate though.
No, the thing for
maybe
Steven,
in the Rockets.
The thing for Steven Adams is he would blaze a path for Ja Morant.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone who's watching the game, they're just like, holy cow, Ja Morant, he just went straight to the basket. And yeah, he's an amazing athlete, incredible basketball player. But as a Kiwi sports nerd, I've literally just watched Steven Adams drag two men, two 6'5" men out of the way. And then Ja Morant's gone in that space. That's the equivalent to Chris Wood. But we have other football to talk about. We have some National League football, Flying Kiwis football. Didn't see a lot of Flying Kiwis in action over the weekend. We did have a debut for Michaela Foster at Durham. She's taken over from Neil Wagner for Durham. Neil Wagner.
They're both lefties.
Maybe Neil Wagner can return to help the Black Caps. Oh, wait, he got injured after one game for Durham. So there didn't seem like as much Flying Kiwis. We do have Maggie Jenkins. She scored in Turkey, so that's good. What's your pick? Do you have any... We got to try and narrow down the National League chit-chat. So unless you've got some Flying Kiwis you want to talk about, were there a couple of storylines, strictly football, because I know you got some broadcasting observations and maybe some complaints, but let's keep it positive. National
we don't
League,
have that much time on that.
Yeah, National League, like best players from the opening weekend, best team, best performance, or something like that.
Yeah, I will just say on the Flying Kiwi stuff, if you're looking for because I do the same thing. I'm watching Nottingham Forest. I'm only focusing on Chris Wood. I try to keep a bigger picture of the context of what he's doing, but specifically, I'm looking for the actions where he's involved. What's he doing? How's he influencing stuff? My favorite of all Flying Kiwis players to do that with at the moment, because I'm doing that for any game I watch with Kiwi players, I'm trying to track the Kiwi involved. My favorite of all is CJ Bott, and it's not even close at the moment. She just is that because they played against Leicester City played against Arsenal on the weekend. Unfortunately, CJ Bott did have a pass back to a goalkeeper which got intercepted. Alessia Russo jumped the passing lane and just stole it and then whipped it in, and that was the 1-0 goal that determine the outcome there. So a mistake from Bob, but other than that, she's just out there against some of the best wingers in the world, monstering people, barging them over, doing a Nessa Biddle things. So we found a Chris Woods, Steven Adams comparison, and now we'll find a CJ Bott and Nessa Biddle comparison. So there's that. National League wise, because there were a couple of games where the broadcast was sketchy, so unfortunately I didn't really get to see stuff. I would have loved to see more of Wellington United in the women's competition, going up to Western Springs and winning 3-2 away from home against the Auckland side like that. And also there were highlights at least of this game, but Waterside Karori getting a 1-1 draw at home against Auckland United. I think the most fascinating thing about it so far is that the two cup winners, the two national cup winners, Chatham and Cache, who also won their domestic leagues, who are also the defending champions of the National League, neither of them actually won this weekend. So Auckland United were held to a 1-1 draw. They have, well, this is in the women's comp, they had won 29 out of 31 games across all competitions this season. Oceania Champions League, NRFL Premiership, Cape Shepherd Cup, won all those trophies, trying to win a National League. They'd won 29 out of 31 games, held to a 1-0 draw by Waterside Karori. So a huge result from the Warfies, who didn't really stack their team at all in terms of guest players like a few of the other ones did. In fact, the biggest guest player in that game was Kaylee Ward, former Waterside Karori striker, who's now apparently just going to play for Auckland United. So they've improved their team upon already being the best team, but they dropped points in week one, and it's such a short season. If they drop points again against Eastern Suburbs in a tricky one next week, suddenly they're a little bit up against it to qualify for the final. And Wellington Olympic also didn't win. They played a game in just beautiful Christchurch behind me on the broadcast that was against Coastal Spirit. It was a Coastal Spirit home game, but they played it at Ferry Mead Bays' ground with the lovely lush green mountains behind. And Coastal Spirit were fantastic defensively, in particular, just absolutely locked it down against the most dangerous, most potent attacking club in the country. And Wellington Olympic held them to a 0-0 draw. And I'm not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's the only game this season that Wellington Olympic haven't scored in. So exciting stuff there in terms of just what that sets up for the competition, because the women's competition in particular, I still think Wellington Olympic they'll score a bunch of goals next week. They'll be fine. Auckland City had a win against Birkenhead. So it's still probably it's hard not to think those two teams are destined to meet in the final again. Although Kashmir Technical did have a 4-0 win against Western Suburbs. Really impressive there, just the way they sat in, defended stoutly, but then attacked really quickly on the break. And Garvin Coughlin was amazing, as he scored a goal, got 2 assists. He was brilliant. Napier City Rovers actually also had a 4-0 win against Western Springs, which I think was a lot closer than it sounds. That game was not quite as one-sided as the scoreline appears. It was 3-0 after 26 minutes. Oscar Folds coming back from his unfortunate trial experiences in Scandinavia. Actually, I thought was quite rusty. He had a couple chances throughout that game where he could have scored a hat-trick if he'd been a bit more potent, but he did score a thumping finish in the 8th minute with the first chance of the game. So that was good. Napier City Rovers look like they could be a pretty dangerous team if they can do that to Western Springs. Cashy Tech as well with their result, but it does still feel like Auckland City, Wellington Olympic, we're going to need a few more upsets before we start to think of those two teams as not being the front runners. But the women's competition, if Auckland United have already dropped points, which puts them a little bit vulnerable, well, I think Southern United are as good as they were last year, and they made the final. I think Canterbury United have improved a lot. The Wellington Phoenix Reserve should be better than they were last season. Didn't necessarily show that against Canterbury United on the weekend, but then for the first half, first 35 minutes, they were pretty good. They were the better team, and then they just kind of, fell from 1-0 up and lost 4-1. But the Auckland teams are always pretty good. And the thing about clubs like Western Springs and Eastern Suburbs is they have the resources to get better and prioritize the national leagues. So even if they were a little bit inconsistent, quite a bit inconsistent throughout the winter season, they should be stronger for these games. West Coast Rangers certainly, they've come in looking like they were the only team that could run Auckland United close during the winter season, and this might be their first National League campaign, but they look like a team that can beat most anyone else in the country. Like they're excellent. And unfortunately, you do have Central Football, who half of their squad was from last year's under-17s, who finished second in the National Youth League. And Central is always quite young, and the best of their players, before they get even to 20, they're moving to play for the Wellington Phoenix Reserves now, because it's just a couple hours, less than a couple hours down the road. Central are always, this is sort of like the Napier, Palmerston, Northie kind of regions, central districts, but without the Nelson aspect of it, if you like to compare it to the cricket setup. they're always kind of the weakest team, and they're probably because the rest of the competition is so strong. I think that's going to look even worse for them this year. So I have some fears for how they're going to track. But I honestly think, especially after the two Wellington clubs as well had really good results in the first week, the women's competition, you've got 9 teams there who anyone could beat anyone else except maybe Auckland United. Like it's that close, it's that competitive this year, and uh, I don't even want to try to predict stuff because it's that's the fun of it, you know. So that competition especially is really well poised. I think we had enough to see from the men's competition to say that one's going to be very competitive as well. Good fun, great to have the National League back.
Favorite player from the opening weekend?
Um, uh, ooh. Women's competition, I might go with the Rose Morden as a familiar face in these kind of things. There's many weeks where she would have been capable of that, but she's just one of those players who, um, fairly small, plays in the midfield, not a big player, but she just has the biggest engine of anyone. She's like dropping into defense to cover. She's making overlapping runs in the penalty area, covering basically every blade of grass, winning 100 tackles per game. And the men's comp, I just wanted to see the strikers. You know, there's 3 import strikers this year who I think have throughout the winter season established themselves as like a step above. Lucas Meek, who's American for Western Suburbs, he kind of got pocketed by Kashmir Tech's defense. Didn't really get anything going. Looked like a frustrated game from him. Didn't get a lot of service either. Uh, Alejandro Steinwasser, I think it is, from Coastal Spirit. He tried hard, but it was a very tight defensive nil or draw. Didn't really see much from him. You might want to class Oscar Folds because he's half Kiwi, half Swedish, but grew up in Sweden. Maybe he counts for that. He did score a goal, but Gavin Coughlin once again with a goal and 2 assists and an extremely influential performance. Basically announced to everyone else like, you think there are other import strikers who can challenge me? There are no other import strikers who can challenge me. He's still atop the mountaintop.
Big Donny, Garvin Coughlin?
He's a big Donny. Coughlin, I don't know exactly. He's
Okay.
Irish.
Don Garvin.
Yeah.